This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Detroit is the greatest! Straight up light you on fire for a coney dog right now.
Darren McCarty comes back to Neiman in front of him. McCarty draws. McCarty in. McCarty scores! A magnificent goal! Darren McCarty!
Stafford takes, throws, end zone, Calvin, touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Welcome into the latest edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. I am the Doc, John Macaroon. Jason Jarvie will be calling in shortly. I'm greatly looking forward to catching up with Jason. It's been about 2 weeks since I had a conversation in the world of Detroit sports with Jason. You can follow him on Twitter at Jarvie the King. You can follow the network at Detroit Podcast. You can find the Detroit Sports Podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Recently, we found out that we're now included as part of the iHeart family, so it's great. You can find the podcast via Apple Podcast. You can find it via Stitcher, Podomatic, DetroitSportsPodcast.com. So there should be no excuse as to why you're not downloading every episode of the Detroit Sports Podcast. We greatly appreciate it. I want to thank the sponsors of this podcast. I want to thank the Motor City Pawnbrokers. With their support, we're able to keep the lights on and the microphones hot here in the Sterling Heights studio. So it's a great opportunity for me to talk sports each and every day. Got an opportunity to go out there and cover the Detroit Tigers versus the Minnesota Twins. I really do enjoy the fact that I get to go out there and go to Comerica Park and see how the Tigers do compare to the elite in the AL Central. Now, this season, right around the time of the last game versus Minnesota, figured out that this year versus the AL Central, the Detroit Tigers are 11-11, and they had a series finale versus Minnesota. And when you looked at the pitching matchup and the Detroit Tigers were sending out Ryan Carpenter, oh man, you kind of don't want to be negative, but based on all the appearances that Ryan Carpenter has made with the Detroit Tigers, many people will honestly say Ryan probably doesn't belong at the big league level, but the Detroit Tigers, unfortunately, have been ravaged by injury. And, for a couple times now, we've had an opportunity to see the likes of Greg Soto and Buck Farmer opening games for the Detroit Tigers. And I really like it. I like the idea that, start the game with a reliever, expect 2 innings, and if you can kind of not blow up and not and your reliever not give up 3-4 runs, and the reliever can keep you in a game, it's an opportunity for you to utilize your bullpen when the time comes. And the Detroit Tigers were able to utilize that successfully during Saturday's game, in which they were able to kind of unleash a little bit offensively, which was good to see. Now you go into Sunday's game, and it's a 1-1 situation with the Minnesota Twins, and what happens? Unfortunately, Ryan Carpenter gives up 8 runs, doesn't have a quality start, and unfortunately the Twins destroyed the Detroit Tigers, won by 10 runs. And it's kind of a deflating feeling when you're covering a team, and you really recognize that they really don't compete really that well versus, one of the best teams in the AL Central. And Minnesota, man, if you make a mistake when you go out there and you play the Minnesota Twins, they pounce, they capitalize, and they put many balls in the seats. It was like when I was talking to Vito when we prepare for the Tigers Talk podcast. I'm telling Vito, going to the games has been tough because the Tigers offense hasn't been really with it. But in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the offense has kind of picked it up. And then you see the Twins, you see the Tampa Bay Rays last week, and they were able to come in and really handle their business. The Tigers did compete a little bit in those contests, but unfortunately they fell victim to some losses there, and they lost the series to the Twins 2-1. But covering the Tigers has been really rewarding. You get a chance to see game in, game out, the preparation that it takes to go out there and compete at the highest level. And right now, the Minnesota Twins are it. They are the class of the AL Central. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, barring any major injuries, I do like the Minnesota Twins and where they're at, and I do like the fact that there's a model in terms of what you can do. You got to be patient. You got to let your guys develop, and several of the guys that are on the Minnesota Twins roster, started with the organization 8 to 10 years ago. So there's an opportunity for the Detroit Tigers and their fans to really take a look at what's going on in the minors, who they drafted this go-around in the Major League Baseball draft, and the Tigers did target a bunch of position players and targeted bats. So we do have to put on our patience hat and ride out this season. It's going to be tough, especially with the myriad of injuries. But at this point in time, I'll say this: watching opponents in terms of who the Tigers are facing has been rewarding in terms of really looking at how other teams have been built and put together. When you look at the Twins, last season, they didn't make the postseason and resulted in a managerial change, but real quick turnaround. They've been able to kind of really utilize a lot of great international players through the draft and people that they've kind of cultivated through that organization, and the Minnesota Twins have really evolved. And that's a model for the Detroit Tigers that they have to utilize. And going forward, I really do hope that the Detroit Tigers take a serious look at how they're being built. And I really hope that a lot of the players that the fans and the organization are counting on come through, including a myriad of pitchers and the plethora of young talent that will play in the field that will be drafted in the coming years ahead. But a big chunk of this podcast, I want to talk to Jason about the situation going on over there in Allen Park. It was announced on Monday that Connor Cook was cut by the Detroit Lions. I was kind of surprised by that after minicamp that Connor Cook didn't really get a chance to stick with the roster. And it really goes to show you that competition really does take place in terms of evaluations, even through OTAs and minicamp. And the Detroit Lions, they decided that maybe potentially Connor Cook doesn't fit what they want to do. And right now, the Detroit Lions are rolling with Matthew Stafford, Tom Savage, and David Fales, a 6th-round draft pick out of San Jose State in 2014. He spent time with 3 teams, most recently the Miami Dolphins. Fales is 6'2" and has never started a professional game in the NFL. But it really is kind of concerning for the career of Connor Cook that he can't even latch on to the hometown team. Many people, which was surprising, many people said at the time when he was drafted, oh my goodness, he's going to be somebody that you got to pay attention to. And the way in which Connor Cook's career has gotten off to, you kind of start to be concerned. Maybe he's not really long for the NFL. We wish all the best to Connor Cook, but with the Detroit Lions, the thing that I want to talk to Jason about when I dial him up is the fact that, are we comfortable with the fact that the Lions are going into the season with backups that not many people really are fond of? I mean, Tom Savage did not play well with the Houston Texans. He was ran out of town there, and he was given ample opportunity. And it just seems like that the Lions are refusing to go out there and draft a talented quarterback that maybe could potentially push Matthew Stafford. Now, many people will say as an excuse, look, if Stafford goes down, how important really is the backup going to be because of the fact that the season probably is going to be over anyway. But look, there are opportunities where you say, look, if Stafford is not playing well, then maybe you do turn to a backup for a spark, somebody that can legitimately push him, somebody that could come in and maybe even steal a job. Because remember that, look at the situation in Philadelphia. Nick Foles was a backup that had talent, that was somebody that you said, well, if the Philadelphia starter gets hurt, can the Philadelphia Eagles really win the Super Bowl? Well, the answer is yes. And there are opportunities where if you do build a good team, then you're going to have to go out there and look to your backup. I mean, many people would have said, no, it's Carson Wentz all the way. We are counting on Carson Wentz to go out there and handle business. But unfortunately, for the better part now of 2 seasons, Carson Wentz has been injured, and Nick Foles has gone in there as the backup and has, really handled his business. Now he's a quarterback that got paid. He's going over there to Jacksonville, and we'll see what he's able to do. But there's an example right there of why a backup is super important. I'm going to dial up Jason right now and get his sense of what the heck's going on with the quarterback situation, the backup situation with the Detroit Lions. Yep, Jason picked up the phone. I had a feeling maybe he would send me right to voicemail, but this time around, he picked up, and he joins us now on this fine edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. Jason, what up, brother?
Oh, well, you have so many phones that I didn't recognize this number, so I picked it up by accident.
That's a good answer, Jason. I only got 2, and look, if you look at it like this, it's a 586 number. The first 3 numbers are similar, and unfortunately, from time to time, you do got to pick up because I do think the conversation is funny, and we do think similarly in terms of Detroit sports, and we're Michigan State supporters, so we got to show a little love from time to time, right?
And we got to stick together.
Yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, another fellow Spartan kind of is now on the unemployment line. The Detroit Lions, earlier on Monday, they said, nope, Connor Cook, not long for the Detroit Lions. And I kind of was surprised in that, Bob Quinn earlier in the offseason said, when he was asked and pressed a little bit, he said, well, the reason why we didn't draft a quarterback in the first 3 rounds is we're pretty happy with Connor Cook and the level of competition with Stafford, Cook, and Savage. But, just like that, on a Monday, he's gone.
Yeah, I really do wish I knew, what are the issues with Connor Cook? Because, in college, he had all the makings to be a really good NFL quarterback, and he just hasn't caught on in the league.
I do think,
and obviously he can't get a job here in Detroit.
Yeah, that's a big no-no. That's a big sign that potentially Connor Cook might not stick on outside of maybe even latching on to a practice squad. But part of the reason to speculate a little bit is probably when you look at it in terms of his overall attitude and makeup and things like that. I do think that maybe in terms of his dedication to the craft, many people maybe are recognizing, okay, you know what, he's got talent, but is he in there early? Is he doing all the work? Is he fitting the proper schemes and doing all the homework? Because if you're not really doing well in terms of, competing, in minicamp and you get beat out by a guy that's, off the scrap heap, I mean, nobody's really heard of David Fales. I mean, he went to San Jose State. If you can't beat him out, and obviously the Lions were looking at him, if you can't force the Lions to go, no, we don't want David Fales, we want Connor Cook, something's wrong, and it might be more than talent.
Yeah, it's looking more and more like he was just a product of the Michigan State system, that he was set up to, he was a good quarterback, and maybe it was just the system that he was in. And, from what I can remember of him at his time in Michigan State, he did run a lot of stuff out of the shotgun, and that was when he was at his best. And even though the NFL is going to more and more shotgun and being pass heavy, on a team like the Lions, where we have a new offensive coordinator in Darrell Bevell, who might be looking more towards a conservative offense, maybe that's just not Connor Cook's strong suit.
Yeah, it's super tough, man. I mean, there was a little bit of hype behind him, a little bit of buzz when he went to Oakland, but if you can't make it with John Gruden and you don't see eye to eye with a quarterback whisperer, there's a little bit of a sign there. Obviously, the Lions, in the manner in which Connor Cook came to the Lions is the Lions and the Raiders had a joint practice, and Connor Cook was somewhat impressive to Bob Quinn, so they decided earlier in 2019 to take a chance, but he lasted about 6 months, but, they decided to look elsewhere. But it lends to the debate and the question, okay, behind Matthew Stafford, obviously QB1 is Stafford, despite the arguments, despite what people will say back and forth, despite what Doc will say in regards to the level of competitiveness with Stafford, the person that you're going to count on, number one, to lead you to the promised land is Matthew Stafford, and it's going to be his job to go out there and execute the game plan. But it's the NFL, and, from time to time, you might roll an ankle, you might take a bump, you might land awkwardly. And if that happens, let's say for an extended period of time, maybe you need a backup for 3 quarters, just one game, the Detroit Lions are going to be looking at Tom Savage and David Fales. I mean, that doesn't scream like continuity. That doesn't scream like, okay, if Stafford fails, then the next man up. It just screams like, okay, we want to keep Stafford comfortable. We want to have good guys in the room, but we're not going to ever go out there and actually sign a guy that could compete to do something. And I, prior to you coming on, I was just talking about the story over there in Philadelphia. Carson Wentz was the golden child. He was the guy that was, the hot stud quarterback, but he went down. And who was there right behind him? Nick Foles, somebody with talent, somebody that had experience that you could say could do some things. Now, did many people think he could go and win the Super Bowl? No. Many people felt like, okay, you go to your backup, the season's over. But he was able to pick up the pieces real quick, and arguably, he's been a great leader before his departure. And so many people, many Lions fans are thinking the exact same thing in this scenario. Why can't the Lions at least spend maybe a 2nd or 3rd round pick and get a legitimate player that could potentially push Matthew Stafford?
Part of the reason is, and this isn't being an excuse for the Lions, but I think part of the reason why you don't see them spend a 2nd or 3rd round pick on a quarterback is because we have so many other needs. And even though they may not have succeeded at drafting very well in those 2nd or 3rd rounds to get players, but that's what they're doing. Is they're trying to fill holes other places. And there's quarterbacks that you could have taken in 4th, 5th, 6th. And honestly, I don't have an answer, because if I was the Lions, I would have at least gotten somebody. I would have taken a flyer on some interesting name that might have brought something different to this team. And it's something frustrating for the Lions and as a Lion fan, because what they're telling you is that it's all about Matthew Stafford. And if Matthew Stafford isn't here, then nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, it's just, Tom Savage is a veteran, but you don't think in a second, could Tom Savage ever take over the job? He basically would just be tasked with handing the ball off. Well, I'm talking about maybe if there were an option of going out there and getting a veteran, similar to a Tom Savage, but with more experience, a la Nick Foles, a la Teddy Bridgewater, or would you say if they were to upgrade the backup position through the draft, what would you rather have? Would you rather have the grizzled vet with experience, or would you rather have the young gun that potentially has a red ass and would push Matthew Stafford to take over the job if Stafford slips?
I mean, I think there's pros and cons to both ways to go. And I mean, I would personally like to see them draft a rookie who would bring something different. I would love to see some sort of a mobile quarterback. I think there were a number of guys in this year's draft who would have been interesting to take flyers on just to see what they can do, what they could bring to this offense. I think another reason a mobile quarterback might work for this offense is because where Darrell Bevell came from, he had a great mobile quarterback in Russell Wilson. And I think that's the type of quarterback that we probably should have been looking for. If we did want to go for the vet, I think Teddy Bridgewater would have been an interesting guy. He's not as mobile nowadays, but he brings a little bit more to the table. And if you're going to bring somebody in, you got to bring somebody who might fit this offense just a little bit better.
I mean, Jason, look at this, okay? Look at this list of backups. I compiled the list, okay? Sean Hill, Drew Stanton, Matt Castle, Jake Rudock, Kellen Moore, Dante Culpepper, and Dan Orlovsky. Bro, I mean, that's all I got to say. I mean, you don't even have – obviously Sean Hill was decent, but outside of that, Dante Culpepper had experience, but he wasn't somebody that, right when Stafford got into the league, they pushed him right into the starting position. Dan Orlovsky, obviously, I think, had the best relationship with Stafford, but when you look at that list, it's just laughable. Pure hilarity in terms of the fact that they won't get a guy behind Matthew Stafford that's just a little bit more than a cheap roster spot.
Now, I do think you have to give a little bit of credit or you can't just blame the Lions completely for this, because not every backup on an NFL team is a great quarterback. I think you single out the Eagles with Nick Foles and Carson Wentz. Not every team has a guy who could come in and lead a team to a Super Bowl. A lot of times, the backup quarterback, he's a bunch of garbage too. So, yeah, the Lions haven't really pursued a really good backup. But, I mean, when you have a guy like Matthew Stafford, unless the organization is upset with him, they're not going to go out and get a guy to really push him.
But, see, the idea is this, okay? Matthew Stafford, obviously QB1. He's got all the talent. He's the guy that's getting paid the most. But eventually, don't you even think for the betterment of Matthew Stafford, many people are speculating why this is taking place. I don't really think that they're coddling Matthew Stafford. I don't think that Stafford would cry or bitch and moan if they went out and improved the backup position. What I'm looking at is I think you improve the team. I think you improve Matthew Stafford with some competition. If they went, if he looks and goes, my position's not secure anymore, maybe he even reads defenses better. Maybe you even push Matthew Stafford to a level that's acceptable. I don't think competition is something that you should run away from, but it seems like they're doing it. It seems like for whatever reason, upper management is looking at it and saying, we got to keep Stafford safe, and no matter what, we can only have a backup at a certain level. I think competition.
But if you're getting that good of a backup quarterback, isn't that also a waste of money of some other position that you could be, trying to get better at?
Well, okay.
Just for a guy who can push Matthew Stafford, because Matthew Stafford's going to be the number one guy. If you're just paying a substantial amount more money just for a quarterback to push Matthew Stafford, that's not enough. You can go Go get another defensive end. Go get another cornerback opposite of Darius Slay. Pay Darius Slay more money. I think these are all better options than getting a marginally better number 2 quarterback.
It sounds like you're okay with it, but okay, what do you make of Tom Savage?
I'm okay with them if they're gonna go just having a veteran guy. I'm fine with them having not the greatest number 2. I want them to get a rookie quarterback, which they haven't done, and that would be the cheap option. But for whatever reason, they're not doing that, and I don't understand why they're not doing that.
Yeah, exactly, because of the fact that are they scared someone could actually have lightning in a bottle, could do more with what the NFL presents? I mean, I know the Lions don't have a strong history of catching lightning in a bottle, but if you just continuously have these backups that are what we call retreads, then you don't really have a chance to really build a solid roster. And remember, some teams, they have 2 backups behind a quarterback, and the Lions have had a combination of 2 and 3 backups. But I'm saying, okay, if you just want to...
Hey, real quick, though, those teams that have 2 backups, how good is their number 1 quarterback? How many quarterbacks are behind Aaron Rodgers? How many quarterbacks are behind Drew Brees?
Right, exactly. It's usually 1. But I'm saying if you want to have and you want to save money, you go with that 2 quarterback system. But the guy behind Matthew Stafford, is it time to say maybe it should be the guy that should be next? I mean, in the 2020 draft, should they consider looking at a quarterback that could potentially be a guy that is next? I mean, are they afraid to say that word, that dreaded N-word, next?
They don't go. Just build a good team. You don't have to draft a quarterback number 1. Matthew Stafford, he should be a capable enough quarterback to run this offense. If you want to draft somebody in the 3rd or 4th round, and let them try and compete. Let them try and push Stafford, because if I want a quarterback to actually come in and really wow us, I want them to really get this great pick and out of nowhere.
Okay, man. I'm just befuddled by the whole scenario because of the fact that it hasn't worked. I mean, 9 years, and you got a certain level out of your quarterback play, and you recognize, okay, if you got a backup maybe potentially that could do some things, I'm not even opposed to potentially from time to time when Stafford doesn't play well to yank his ass and use the backup to maybe send a signal and send a message to Matthew Stafford that, hey, your job is not guaranteed. And I think that's where I think a lot of the fans are befuddled and confused, is that it would be okay from time to time to put in a backup to see if there's a spark, but you don't potentially see Tom Savage providing a spark at any point, do you? I mean, the guy was awful in Houston.
No, not really. I mean, and we shouldn't have to see Tom Savage come out there and play.
Exactly. That's the whole point, is that you talked about it. Why not go out there and get a Teddy Bridgewater? Why not go out there and make a play for Rosen and send a signal? Why not go out there and make a move that's a little bit different than what you've been doing, because the status quo hasn't been good enough? And that's the most fascinating part about this whole thing, is why. Why has there been this reluctance to sign an upper echelon backup? It's so weird. It's so unusual because of the fact that, hey, and actually, Jason, we should be thankful. Matthew Stafford has been pretty durable, where the Lions can actually take this gamble year in, year out, and somewhat to state it, it has worked because of the fact that Stafford's hasn't missed a lot of plays.
Absolutely, and that is it's the give or take. It's a gamble, but when you do have a track record of Stafford staying healthy, then you don't have to go out there and pay a ton of money to have a quarterback who can actually come in and that you might have to rely on. Like, you look at the Indianapolis Colts when Andrew Luck had like the season or two where he was basically out every other game, and you never knew, what's going to happen with him. And in that type of situation, yeah, you do have to start thinking about, maybe we do need another guy who could take over for this team. But Matthew Stafford has been durable outside of the first couple of years of his career, that that he's going to play.
It's just a fascinating look at what's going on in the room. Did you get a chance to see the early report there? Matt Patricia laid into TJ Hawkinson because he dropped an easy one. Dave Burkett reported that, early in minicamp, there was a throw kind of that was made, and TJ Hawkinson tried to Hollywood it, and he dropped it, and everybody saw it. And I obviously were hypercritical of one play, but it was reported that in not so nice fashion, Matt Patricia laid into TJ Hawkinson because of the fact that he dropped a pass that every tight end in the world should have caught. And I just said, oh my God, why would you write that? Why would you write that report? I mean, it's just one single play, but obviously it highlights the fact that, TJ Hawkinson and the tight end position, it's not easy. And if you just look at the history of tight ends in the first round and what they do in their first season, it's not substantial. So I don't know, man. It's going to be tough for TJ to have a lot of impact that first year. I just hope he blocks well and the running game can turn it around. At least that's what I want to see early in training camp and the first couple preseason games.
Yeah, I just want to see TJ Hawkinson perform. He doesn't need to go out game one and catch 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I just want him to be a reliable option, to be a safety valve, to be anything other than the dead bodies that we had last year at tight end. If he can be anything more than that, then, it's gravy, man.
Yeah. Any other storylines that you're following along? Obviously, the contract situation with Snacks and Darius Slay has everybody's attention. Anything else that you're paying attention to? Obviously, the other player that's getting a lot of attention and a lot of coverage is Tease Tabor. He's come out and said at times, look, I don't really have room to talk. I got to get better. He gets beat routinely, time in and time out, but he does make some plays. But some of the Lion wide receivers are making names for themselves on Tease Tabor because of the fact he's so inconsistent.
Yeah, that's what's been the storyline the past couple of years, is that who's going to be the cornerback opposite Darius Slay. And we've had Nevin Lawson for the past couple of years, and he's been brutal. Tease Tabor was supposed to be the answer, and he just, I don't know. I'm not sure if he's going to cut it. So maybe Justin Coleman comes in, brings a little bit of stability, but it's a tough position, but I feel like the Lions probably should have addressed that a little bit more, and they should. They need to pay Darius Slay his money.
Before we end the podcast, I want to get your sense of the NBA final and the NHL final, but I want to give love to the Motor City Pawnbrokers. The Motor City Pawnbrokers are the one-stop pawn shop when you're in need of short-term cash or are looking for quality brand name, new, and pre-owned merchandise with locations in Detroit, Ferndale, Roseville, and Warren. Their mission is to deliver exceptional value. For all information and the great deals that are going on right now at Motor City Pawnbrokers, go visit MotorCityPawnbrokers.com. That's MotorCityPawnbrokers.com, a great sponsor of the network. So, Jason, as we're recording this, on Wednesday, the St. Louis Blues are going to go on the road to take on the Boston Bruins. And tonight, Monday, it's going to be Game 5 of the NBA Finals, where Toronto's at home. They have all the advantage, and you have a rabid fan base over there in Toronto looking to take down an NBA title. But there is a great return of Kevin Durant, which is going to potentially add some more sizzle to the series. Where do you see the NBA and NHL finals stacking out as this week progresses? Who do you see winning the titles?
It's really a toss-up for Boston and St. Louis in the NHL finals. I haven't really gotten that much into it just because I hate Boston because they've just been there so many times the past couple of years. The entire city has been there. This would be their third straight, major championship because what? Who won it? The Red Sox and the other Boston team, the Patriots.
That's right.
They won. This would be a third straight championship. It's not fair. Stop winning. So I hate Boston and St. Louis. They're just boring. I have a hard time. I like Tarasenko, but I just have a hard time really getting excited about St. Louis. So, it's a game 7 though, so it's really going to be interesting. It's all going to really depend on what St. Louis team decides to show up, because it seems like they can hang with Boston, but then you get a game 6 where they get broomed out. So I say it's probably going to be Boston, and I'm going to hate it. But I love the NBA finals. I've watched way more NBA and way more Warriors than I have the Pistons over the past 3 years of Pistons. So I really do hope. I would love to see the Warriors come back and win it in 7 to have that kind of the turnaround after losing 3-1 to the Cavs, to come back, get the third straight by winning 3-1. I don't know. I think they can do it. I think Kevin Durant, if he could be 100% or even like 90%, I think they can win this game.
Yeah, give me the Raptors, give me the Bruins, and I think it's been exciting. If you have paid attention to it a little bit, I have, not too actively because obviously I love Detroit sports, but the series are producing some storylines. I mean, St. Louis, I love the fact that they partied all day, they were all excited, and then Boston went in there and just took it away from them, and it's going to be a pivotal Game 7. It's going to be fun, and like always, whoever scores first obviously has a huge advantage, and out of the NBA, I do think the biggest storyline, even though Kevin Durant is returning, is the emergence of Kawhi Leonard going into that stratosphere of like top 2 players in the entire league. I mean, Kawhi Leonard put a team on his back and really helped an organization. And if he does decide to leave, then he can leave with his head held high with a championship and a potential MVP. So Kawhi Leonard is amazing, and nobody really expected the Toronto Raptors to go in there and really compete at the level that they did. So it's been exciting, and I do hope that Toronto does take it down and potentially end the dynasty. If KD decides to leave, it'll make the offseason that much more interesting, definitely for sure.
This may be a talk for another time, but I still don't understand Kawhi Leonard. I don't get the hype. I still do feel like, I don't know, they compare him to Michael Jordan, and that Michael Jordan.
Yeah, no.
And then you talk about LeBron James and Kobe Bryant. I don't put Kawhi Leonard in that. He's a really good player. I don't think he's anywhere close to Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I've enjoyed the conversation, Jason. Oh, man, when you do pick up, we do get a chance to talk Detroit sports. It's always good. Motor City Sports Rant comes out every Tuesday when we have the opportunity to connect. Jason is part of the show. You can follow Jason on Twitter at Jarvie the King. Follow the network at Detroit Podcast. Definitely, if you've agreed or disagreed with anything that we've said, feel free, fire off a tweet. We love the engagement. And Jason, look, even though the Lions are refusing to get a backup quarterback, maybe this year will be the year where Darrell Bevel and that offense can do some things, maybe the safe approach. Maybe just get that 20 points and rely on your defense. And maybe that's all Stafford has to do is become the legend by handing the ball off and checking it down. Maybe that's all he's got to do.
Maybe. We'll see.
Thank you, Jason. I enjoyed the conversation. We'll talk next week.
Later, man.
Thanks again, everybody, for finding us. You've just downloaded the latest edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. See everybody next time.
Okay, nice, idiot. F you. Bye-bye.
Good day, sir. I said good day.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye then.
Loser.